If I could encourage everybody to take their seats, please. Good morning and welcome to this event today on the Under 2 Coalition Leadership for 2050, Subnational Action with a Long-Term Vision. Today's event is hosted by the Climate Group and Climate Analytics. My name is Libby Ferguson and I am States and Regions Director at the Climate Group, and it is a pleasure to see so many of our Under 2 Coalition governments here today and our friends and partners. We've got some really inspiring sessions ahead, but firstly, before we get into the dialogues, I'd like to introduce Helen Clarkson, Chief Executive of the Climate Group, and Paul Simpson, Chief Executive of CDP, who will launch our States and Regions Annual Disclosure for 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning, and it's a great pleasure to be able to launch today in partnership with CDP, our Global States and Regions Disclosure Update. Here it is, and new online climate action tracker for states and regions. Every year, the Climate Group and CDP call upon state and regional governments to disclose their climate targets and actions, their emissions inventories, and other climate information. And this measurement and reporting is a critical tool in climate action because it really helps them understand the risks and opportunities of climate change, increase their impact, and inspire others to do the same. And if those of you who are here have reported, please encourage other governments to report as well. Through this, we really are putting transparency and accountability at the heart of climate action. So let's look at, it worked, some of the results. From this, you can see that over 100 governments from 36 countries are now disclosing their climate targets. And on average, their 2020 targets are exceeding the ambition of their national counterparts. And you can see on this slide the scale and scope of both the economies involved and the size of their greenhouse gas emissions. You can also see that they're also succeeding in reducing their emissions, so an 8.5% average reduction over their baselines. And here, this slide is showing us the growth in the targets. I hope you can read it well, but essentially the bigger blue circles are showing the growth from last year. And what you can see here is on the left, a number of growth in emissions, greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets. And then you can also see that there's a growth in specific renewable energy targets and in energy efficiency targets. So we can see that those targets are growing. And also we can see that the actions that are being taken to hit those targets are also increasing. So this is an 80% increase over last year. So more climate action across really impactful sectors such as buildings, energy and transport. So this shows the level of activity that subnational governments are undertaking. All that is great news, and all that was quite easy graphics. This is your challenging slide for the morning. So this graph shows us that you can see that black line going down. You can see across the bottom at 2020 on target to meet their goals. But that grey zone there is the gap between what we need to do in order to get to 2050. So if we want to get well below 2 degrees C of limit warming, then there's a lot more that needs to be done. So what we really need to do now, and I know our panel are going to encourage, is really good 2050 planning, and that's what we're calling on governments to do. So with that, I'll hand over to Paul Simpson from CDP. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everyone. As Helen said, it's really great to see so many states and regions represented here at COP. And for those of you that were all involved in Paris, it's very clear that the role of the non-state actor, as described by the UNFCCC, the states and regions, the cities, the businesses and the investors has become more important than ever on delivering the Paris Agreement. So it's great we're here to talk about states and regions, and very much CDP delighted to be working for many years now in partnership with the Climate Group on states and regions disclosure. I have the pleasure of working on climate disclosure for the last 16 years, and you could ask, why would anyone want to work on disclosure for 16 years? I'm still asking myself the same question, but ultimately the data, the measurement of that data is critically important to help us track progress on how states and regions are implementing the Paris Agreement, where the gaps are, as Helen has shown, and to provide really valuable information for everybody to make better informed, smarter decisions. And that's why we're delighted today, with the kind support of Climate Kick Low Carbon City Lab, we have the support from them to produce 2 analytics tools for states and regions. The first one is a publicly available tool, it'll be available to everybody on the website, the Climate Action Tracker, and this is taking the data from states and regions disclosures and looking at what are the trends, and we've seen some of this in the great report today. What are the trends, what are the emissions reduction targets, what are the actions that the states and regions are taking, and what is the detail behind those. So this Climate Action Tracker is a tool for the whole world to really keep score on what states and regions are doing, to understand that better, to learn from the best practice and leadership of many of the states and regions, so that others can amplify and pick up those activities as well. Alongside the Climate Action Tracker, we have then a tool that is just for the states and regions themselves. I know many of you have here today, the Climate Analytics Navigator. So this is a tool that goes into even more detail for you in the states and regions, the people working on your climate action plans, to say, you know, what are our peers doing? How can we benchmark ourselves against some of the great states and regions? We're going to hear from some today, like California and Washington. What are some of the leaders doing? What are some of the smaller states and regions doing? And how can we use this great wealth of a data set to improve our inventory development, our greenhouse gas emissions reductions measurement? How can we use this data and this tool to set better, more ambitious targets? Of course, they need to be achievable, but they need to be in line with, or at least well below 2 degree pathway. And we know some states and regions also building in the ambition of a 1.5 degree operations in their region. So the Navigator really help the states and regions to do this benchmarking and to make better informed decisions and really set more ambitious targets, to learn from the activities that others are doing. And we know that, you know, no one is going to solve climate change on their own, and it's the collaboration and the sharing of this information through the tool that's really critical. So we hope these tools will be very useful to you as a community, to you specifically in the states and regions. We'd love your feedback on them. When you use them and they're valuable, please tell us. When you use them and it's not giving you what you need, please tell us, and we'll really work to improve them, making sure they serve you. So the purpose of this tool is that the data will give you the insights to take further action on climate change and deliver the world we all need in your states and regions. And just to echo what Helen said, there's a lot of great work going on, but there's still a gap. And that is why these tools can really help bridge the gap. So we're delighted to be working with the Climate Group and you in the states and regions to deliver this. And we look forward to your feedback on the tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Helen. So ahead of our first high-level dialogue of this morning, I'd like to introduce Yasmin Kanzler from Climate Analytics, who's going to give us the global picture beyond the state and regional picture.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. It is a pleasure being here with you today. I will give a short overview on where current climate policies and pledges are taking us based on research conducted by the Climate Action Tracker project, a project that we are doing together with Ecofis and the New Climate Institutes, tracking climate pledges and policies since 2009. Now, at the very heart of the Paris Agreement, we have a scientifically based goal, the 1.5 degree temperature limit. And despite the support and widespread ratification of the agreement, many countries still have to ratchet up their ambition, which is reflected in the Climate Action Tracker rating you see here on the map. Of the 32 countries that the Climate Action Tracker is assessing, only one of those, Morocco, is currently rated Paris Agreement compatible, and all other countries have yet to ratchet up their ambition and come up with improved NDCs in the next round. This is then also reflected in our global warming estimates that the Climate Action Tracker publishes once a year. Those numbers that you see here are still from 2016. Our newest numbers will be launched next Wednesday. But what we found, based on the data from 2016, is that the current policies are taking us to 3.6 degrees and the pledges are taking us to 2.8. So a substantial gap remains for the Paris Agreement. And for those of you for whom 2100 may be a very large time span, we also always spell out the emissions gap in 2025 and 2030 to make it a bit more tangible, to show what the gap is towards where we need to go versus where we're heading. And that was one of the key motivations why last year in Marrakesh, the Climate Action Tracker came up with a report, the 10 steps, outlining 10 short-term steps to peak and start emissions decline. And the key message of that publication essentially is that we need now action in all sectors, decisive action, in order to avoid more costly actions later on. I will not go through all of these measures outlined in the report now, and for those of you who may have not seen the report yet, this could potentially seem a bit daunting, having this big slide there now, but in order to make that a little bit more digestible, I want to draw attention to all the positive developments that we are already seeing today. And to help your imagination along, I propose that for the next 2 minutes or so, we're just going to focus on the transportation sector and highlight some of the key drivers of this year. And I know it's a bit early. Usually those highlights of 2017 only come after Christmas, where they sort of pop up. But I want to do a highlight now of 2017 transportation. And if I had to do that, I would probably blend in now a flashy picture of Elon Musk, probably followed by a picture of the impressive EV fleet in China, followed by maybe a picture of Volvo, and then I'd say a picture of General Motors, because even General Motors now believes in an all-electric future. And if you see the numbers of uptake of EVs, we see an impressive increase in 2016, reaching 2 million, after only having reached the threshold of 1 million in 2015. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance is predicting that EVs are on track to accelerate to 54% of new car sales by 2040. So taking that together with the impressive policy signals we are observing in China and India and other places, this is putting us on towards a trajectory to an all-electric future. But the main question is now how quickly these efforts can be scaled up, and how innovation and policy signals can work hand in hand together to deliver at a speed that is required for the Paris Agreement. So if I had to sum up where we're standing today with regards to the Paris Agreement, I would have to say that there are many promising developments across all sectors. Climate action is increasingly becoming mainstream. It is no longer just perceived as a burden. It is increasingly and rightly so acknowledged as a tremendous opportunity, bringing a multitude of local and regional benefits and co-benefits. And the main task for us is now to accelerate these positive developments. And I'm very delighted and excited to hear in the panel discussion how the panelist states and regions can and are already supporting this much needed acceleration. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. So it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce the speakers for our first dialogue. These individuals need no introduction, but please join me in welcoming to the stage Governor Jerry Brown of California, Governor Kate Brown of Oregon, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, and this session will be chaired by a great friend of ours, Laurence Toubiana, the former French climate change ambassador and special representative for COP21, and now CEO of the European Climate Foundation. Thank you.
So, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to be here for after now almost 2 years after Paris achievements, because in this particular endeavor, the local government and this perspective of the long term that Jerry Brown is really supporting through under to MOU has played a massive role in achieving Paris as it is. And in particular on the global goals, the vision of the 2050 perspective was really an outcome we could never have had in Paris if it was not through a very, very strong local actors and vision. And after that, it happens that it was not only the vision and the goals in Paris Agreement and the quality of the agreement we could sign, but proving the resilience of this Paris Agreement. And of course, the proof was when President Trump decided that the government of the United States should withdraw from the Paris Agreement, there was a cry out of the American society, in particular pushed by the local government, to say, you may withdraw, but we are not, we are still in. So this is really, that's why I'm so happy and to have been invited to moderate this session. Of course, I will listen to you, and I'm sure I will feel energized just after that discussion. And it's a very important moment now to have that discussion and this conversation, because we will have to, as I think Jasmine said very clearly, and again, I thank this new tool that will help us just check where are we, and where we should go, because we have to accelerate the pace. And this communication of you local governments, of you governors to the governments at the world level, not only in US, but very broadly, will give them courage to accelerate their commitments and to increase them before 2020. So given that, I will be very happy to now listen to all of you. Of course, I will ask Jerry, which again doesn't need any presentation and introduction, but it will be good to really to see you, how you feel now. That would be the key elements, and in particular because your vision that we have to set the goal for 2050 to be able to make the good decision today was something you always pushed in broadly in your state, but more broadly. And that would be, I will just thank you if you can just see how you see the role, the practical role and the political role of local government in achieving the goals of Paris, and you see the main opportunities ahead to prepare for your summit in September.
Okay. Phone. Hello. Yeah, you can hear. Well, I see it's two factors that comprise what local government does and can do. One, local government can adopt mandatory policies, rules for greater emissions reduction, building standards, the vehicles that are allowed. Local government can set rules for where cars can go, can set give advantages to electric cars, can encourage carpooling, bicycles, walking. So there's a whole area that local government can take by way of government action, government coercive rules, building standards and transportation and waste management. So there are many, many things that cities can do. There are more things, often, not more, but there are different things that states can do. California has a number of not a number, but it has an authority across a broad front. So we actually impose mandatory rules on car emissions and buildings standards and the kind of energy that an electric company can use to generate electricity. State of California can tell a private electric company, you must use 30% renewable, and between now and 2030, you must increase that to 50%. So we have that authority. I don't know if everybody does. We have a cap and trade system, one of the few in the world, and it's strengthened, and it's working, and generating money. It generates billions of dollars. California is a big state. So those are the things we can do, and only each city and each state knows what it can do. And then the second thing, local leaders can help convert people to a climate-friendly philosophy or future. The world is not focused really on climate change. The world is focused on more immediate things, on money, on housing, on crime, on schools, on childcare, on healthcare. These are all fundamental elements of living in a community, and politicians respond to those kind of problems. So this climate change is on top of all that. And therefore, we are constantly challenged to educate ourselves. Number one, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot I'm learning. I just was in Oslo talking to scientists from the national academies of several countries. Lots to learn about the science, just what's going on in the world. That's one thing. And then the next thing is to get other people, to get our constituents, our neighbors, to wake them up, to talk to our national political leaders. Most of the conversation that I certainly have is not about climate change. When I'm talking to a congressman or a senator, they're not bringing up climate change. They are if they're here. But back home, there's always 100 other issues. People are focused in America on the tax reform. They're focused on North Korea, nuclear missiles or something. But climate change is what we have to put on the agenda while not neglecting other important and immediate things. But we have to build climate consciousness. And that means we have to use the science of our scientific panels. Most people are not worried about climate change. A majority will say, yes, I believe we should do something. And if and after there are fires, or perhaps in New Delhi after the terrible pollution, or in Shanghai, people will say, yeah, let's do something, because their health and their immediate well-being is affected. But for a lot of people, they're not thinking about it. You know, sitting in the middle of Houston, Texas, well, now you had a big hurricane. Maybe they're going to think more about it. But in America, there are many places where the word climate change cannot be used. It's a no-no word. The governors of Florida said, don't ever mention climate change. So we have a job of just mentioning that there's something called climate change. Then we have to get people to worry about it. Then we got to get actions and policies that we, the state and local people, can do, and we have to be pressuring our congressional or our federal counterparts to do stuff. And so I want to emphasize that. There's a lot of persuasion. Two big things have happened in the last couple of years. One is the Paris Agreement, very important. And a lot of that was Obama talking to Xi. Very important. If those two hadn't talked, if we'd had Trump there, we wouldn't have had a Paris, maybe we wouldn't have had a Paris Agreement. So that's something that happened. And that's helpful, because now people talk about it. Climate change is on the agenda. And then Trump came along, and he says there is no climate change. It's a hoax. And it's a Chinese hoax. Now, I would say very few people in America, much less in the world, believe that. So when you have the leader of America saying an obvious falsehood, absurdity, nonsense, that generates a certain amount of energy. Paradoxically, it'd be better if President Trump was leading the charge to do what's right on climate change. But the fact that his opposition is framed in the form of an absurdity helps undermine the denialist case. Some denialists can make it sound like they have a plausible case. No denialist is persuasive when they talk about a hoax conjured up somewhere in China. So the obvious absurdity of that and the opposition is creating its opposite. And that's what's happening in California. It's happening in America. The pro-climate change forces are getting stronger because we have someone's laid out a challenge that's very specific, and we can react to that. So those are the two things. You have to do everything you can do to bring down the emissions, get more zero-emission vehicles, and that's not easy because they're more expensive. People want to drive in SUVs. To show you how quickly, it wasn't very long ago that people thought a truck was for work. And now the propaganda, or the meme, if I can use that word, the meme. You all know what a meme is, right? Okay. The meme is that you're not safe in anything smaller than one of these big SUVs. So they got people to think they're buying an SUV to save themselves and their family. Now, I think that's a nonsense idea, but we have to, so that's another problem we have to get hold of. So EVs are coming in, we have to accelerate. So we have to become missionaries, if you don't find that phrase offensive, and some people I'm sure will. But we need prophets, we need missionaries, we need zealots to promote climate action. This is not enough just to talk about numbers. You have to have emotion, you have to have feeling. You've got to be so possessed of this reality that our climate can be destroyed for human habitation, and we're not going to let it happen. So that's what I think local leaders can do, and this COP23 helps generate the level of enthusiasm and commitment and political will. That's what we're doing. We're building the political will, and we'll take it home, and then we'll be back, hopefully, in San Francisco in the fall of 2018. That is, if you're not going to Paris in December, which I am. Come to San Francisco. The weather will be better. You'll find it very pleasant, and we will. But don't come if you haven't done more for climate action. So do something between now and then, and we're going to be calling you. If you're going to be one of the invited guests, you're going to get a call, maybe from me or from people that I work with. What are you doing? What are your emissions? What are they going to be next year, and then and so on in the next 5 years? We have to really have a number, we have to have a target, and we have to encourage each other to go beyond, because there's plenty of resistance. There's plenty of resistance right in California. It's carrying, I don't want to say it's, I do say it's the rock of indifference. And I didn't want to think of Sisyphus, because then the rock would fall down. So this is a different kind of rock. This is like the rock of the tomb. You pull it aside and the Savior comes out. So that's the way we should think of our climate action.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Personally, if all missionaries, I like this type of missionaries and zealots. Normally, I don't like them so much, but these, yes. Jay, I'm always puzzled by what you described, Jerry, the deniers, the skeptics. I think in your state, Jay, you are feeling climate change impact, and I know you are now trying to raise awareness and just to describe what is happening in your state, and at the same time giving the long-term vision. You have done your 2050 pathway. I would like you comment on that. How did you do that? How you rally the vision around this? How you see the future of your state, and how much you have in a way to want people to describe, because I think the issue of the feeling and the awareness, but the feeling that people we should raise their consciousness, but talking to their feelings, and so I know you are doing a lot on that. And both on those side of having the long-term vision and really considering the impact and trying to communicate on that. Can you just describe a little bit of what you have done on that, on your state?
I think the fires are waking people up.
Yeah.
And the scientists are telling us that parts of California are going to be burning up. Now, let me be precise about what that means. When the temperatures rise and the moisture evaporates, this is a very dangerous and different situation. California's had droughts over the centuries, but the climate scientists are telling us that these 100-year droughts are coming much more frequently. And when it's dry, for example, in that fire in Napa, the humidity was around 5% at midnight. So that means the grass, the trees, all the things that can burn. And then you get a spark. You get a spark from a power line or from a lightning. And then you get the flames, and the flames move. And the winds that are created, 80 miles an hour. And those sparks really move. And some people died. They couldn't get out in time. And you can't believe it. You're living your life for years and years, and all of a sudden a fire is just down the road, and you have a hard time getting out, and some can't. Some were in a swimming pool, and they survived that way. So we are learning through the fires, through the droughts, through the different behavior of the weather. It's actually changing. The snows. California has a very efficient water system. Snow falls in the mountains in the north, and that snow stays as snowpack, and then it melts gradually, and the water goes into rivers, and then the rivers provide the water for virtually the whole state. Well, now instead of snow, we're getting rain, and rain comes all at once. And when the water comes all at once, you get floods, and you can't use the water. You can't store it all. So that means you're going to have less water available. So the very physical existence in California is changing. I'm not saying everybody gets that, but it's getting clearer and clearer what climate change means, because we're in that area in the Southwest in the United States that is getting so warm. So that's how I think people are getting it. And then more and more cities are talking about it. More mayors, more city council people. We have to keep talking about it. We have to introduce it. It has to become a topic of general awareness. It is not a topic of general awareness. We have a lot of other things. The World Series is a lot bigger than climate change. Monday Night Football for millions of people is far more important than climate change. So we have to find ways, and these meetings, these conferences, our summit next year, are ways of generating news and awareness and talk. So basically it has to get in the minds of hundreds of millions of people, and then the mind has to lead to action. And that's the process. So first the idea, then the action, then the result.
Thank you. Jay, what in Washington State, what are your plans and how you did this 2050 pathway vision, and again, how you talk to people, feelings on the impact?
I will answer that question, but before I do so, I think the principal goal of Bonn and Paris is to inspire each other. And I have to tell you, I've been inspired today by a young woman, Jasmine Kanzler, who just told us what we've got to do to solve this problem. And she inspired us because she told us we got to up our game. Can we show a round of applause for a young woman who told us we got to up our game here? I really appreciate what she did for us. So our plan in Washington State is the same plan as Oregon and California and British Columbia, which is to do two things. Number one, demonstrate to the world that we can solve this problem. And number two, that we can solve this problem while simultaneously growing our economies. And that is the fundamental challenge here. Because the fundamental difference between the people in this tent and the people in the White House is that the people in the White House are afraid, they are pessimists, they do not believe we can solve this problem and grow our economies. We are the can-do caucus. We are the people who know we can solve the problem. And by the way, we are not subnationals, we are supranationals. And we are supranationals because we recognize that we can solve this problem. Now, small example just from my state. In 2000, there was virtually zero wind power in my state. We passed a renewable portfolio standard. We now are over 70% of our entire grid is in zero carbon emissions generating capacity. And we now have 3,000 megawatts of wind capacity feeding perfectly clean energy into our grid system. Those policies can generate savings dramatically. In our West Coast, we have reduced our joint emissions by 6% since 2005, while we're growing our economies at 20%. So we have demonstrated the ability to move forward in this regard. Now, that isn't just a statistic. It is a human story. And one of my favorite stories, Trudy and I was here, we were over looking at the fires in Eastern Washington because we've been hit just as hard as California a couple years ago. And we were looking at the fires, and we looked at this fire that was burning at the base of a wind turbine that was new, that was created because of our renewable portfolio standard. And I saw this white pickup truck coming down the road, and a fellow stopped and got out, and we started talking to him, and I asked him about it. I says, what does the wind turbine renewable portfolio standard mean to you? And he goes, Congressman, I was a congressman at the time, let me tell you what this means. And he slaps his hood on his pickup, and he said, the renewable portfolio standard to me means a shiny white pickup, a job that he loved. And we are now generating jobs like crazy. The solar industry in our area is generating jobs 17 times faster than the whole rest of the economy as a whole. This is the greatest job creating capacity effort in the United States today. And that's why when Donald Trump ran out the white flag of surrender to climate change, we ran out a thing not only in our 3 states, but in 15 states across the United States. And we have formed the United States Climate Alliance. We've committed ourselves to fulfilling Paris. We're all doing things. Very frequently, the things that have happened in Oregon and California have also happened in Washington, and we all brag and think we're the best. We think it is a tie in the best wine. We've all agreed on that in the Pacific Coast. And if this 15-state coalition was a nation, it would have the 3rd largest economy in the world. So the word from the Pacific Coast, the word from our 15-state United Climate Alliance, that we're in it to win it. We're growing our economies through renewable portfolio standards, through efforts to grow our penetration of electrical vehicles. And by the way, if we have 350,000 electrical vehicles now, they're growing at 25%. We have 5,000 charging stations, and that's why we're increasing the use of electrical vehicles. In my state, we've just increased our solar incentive to help people buy solar panels. And as a result, we're going to have 150 more megawatts in the next year or two of solar panels. We have in my state a cap imposed by executive action on the amount of carbon that our major polluters have emitted. And that cap is now a cap on 65% of our economy. And that is a binding cap created by executive authority from our state Clean Air Authority. We've passed the largest and greenest transportation package to emphasize green transportation opportunities for our folks. So the message from our states is this: Donald Trump cannot stop us. He cannot stop us from having limitations on carbon emissions. He cannot stop us from incentive programs to incentivize solar panels. He cannot stop me from having a clean energy research fund at our universities so we can create new research centers. He cannot stop us from having ways to help companies like UEV, which is now building the largest vanadium flow battery, so we can integrate renewable sources into our grid. He cannot stop us. We're moving forward. And Lorenz, thanks for your Parisian accent and progress.
Thank you. Kate, that's really the Pacific states. The West Coast is really, and Kate, how you I know you have done a lot in Oregon, and you are doing a lot to meet your your emission targets. And what's your vision of what you have done already and what you want to do next?
Thank you, and I'm absolutely delighted to participate with my colleagues from the West Coast. I do want to pick up on something that Governor Brown said. He mentioned public policy and preaching as a way of changing hearts and minds. And the other way, at least for us in Oregon, it's partnerships. And as part of the Pacific Coast Collaborative, the 3 of our states plus British Columbia is significant in terms of the world's economy. We comprise 1/5 of the world's economy. It's 55 million people. But for a state like Oregon, which is relatively small, we're 4 million people, we're able to make a difference working with them on grid integration, fully implementing EV infrastructure throughout the region, and of course tackling ocean acidification. So for a small state like Oregon, we can really make a difference. But I think it's key for the states to be what I call the petri dishes of progressive public policy. We're where the innovative ideas can happen and can get implemented. So under my leadership, we were able to move forward on the nation's first coal to clean, intentionally moving away from coal-generated electricity. And we are also shutting down our only coal-generated electrical plant several years earlier. We just passed a very comprehensive green energy transportation package. We're providing rebates for low-income families to be able to purchase EVs, electric vehicles. And for the first time ever, we as a state have invested in public transit in ensuring that our communities around the state have access to public transit, which is truly a vehicle out of poverty for our families. So we see this as the way forward. And then I'm certainly using my tools as governor by signing executive orders to continue our path forward to EV vehicles. We right now in our state have 16,000 EV vehicles on the road. But if we collaborate with the private sector and our utilities, our goal, and the executive order says this, is to have 50,000 electric vehicles on the road by the year 2020. It's a huge goal, but it's something we can absolutely do. And the other piece is 30% of our energy consumption is by buildings, residential and commercial. And I was able to sign an executive order just this week that will reduce the energy consumption by state buildings, both leased and owned, and then also move the private sector, both residential and commercial use, to net zero ready by 2023 and 2026. So we truly can set policy. We can preach. We can certainly use our bully pulpits, and we can work in partnership to move to ensure that we are tackling global climate change. Oregon is very small, as I said, but we can be a leader in the country and around the world in terms of implementing best practices, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Time is running short, and I don't think we have time for question and answers, unfortunately. I just want us that we, in a way, take the energy you have been gathering here. I think we have clear milestones preparing, of course, meeting in Paris for those who will come to the summit in December, but preparing really have our eyes on the summit in California to say how much we have progressed. I think it's really important that you try to infect the East Coast as well, because they need your support. But I know that beyond that, I like what Jay and Jerry and Kate said. You are in a way supranational. You are talking to the global issues and to the global challenges. And I think that's what I think we have to make all our efforts, all this community, to really just show what you are doing and make you visible on the global scene. So third, I think through your activities, you are encouraging governments to go further. And I think that, again, whatever we can do to help you convince the government that they can be more courageous, whether your government or others, that will be so important. And I have finally a final call for you. There is now a movement against really to try to phase out coal in the power production. Really, I think it would be great that these very progressive states you are and your leadership at global level, you can unite with the countries like UK, Canada and others and France who have decided to phase out coal. Just a call for you if you would like to join this. I think that would be a powerful signal, again, maintaining the ambition, raising the ambition and encourage government not to shy away of their responsibility. I would like we applaud these extraordinary leaders. I'm always fascinated to see whatever happens, they are there. And as Jasmine said, we have to just do more, to go further and faster these days, but we are there, you are there. And a round of applause for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurence. Thank you, governors. Thank you. Another round of applause when they take their seats. We might just have a quick photo opportunity with Helen and Paul as well. Thank you. If I can move us on to our second dialogue of the morning. And can I invite our speakers from the second dialogue up on stage? This dialogue will be chaired by Helen Clarkson, Chief Executive of the Climate Group. We have Chris Ballard, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change from the Government of Ontario. Thank you, Minister Ballard, for joining us. Bill Hare, who is founder and CEO of Climate Analytics. Thank you, Bill. Sandy Pitcher, Chief Executive of the Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources from South Australia. And Priest Davis, Deputy Director of Decarbonisation and Energy from the Welsh Government. Can you please join me in welcoming our next speakers?
Thank you, Libby. And we're now going to be talking, as it says here, about the clean energy transition. I think this is a great follow-on from Laurence's call there in the last session. We're going to hear, first of all, from Bill Hare, who will give us a presentation and is going to really focus, I think, on coal.
We got rid of it in 2014. Okay, I'll stay.
Thanks, everyone. I found that was a very inspiring session just then to hear very much about the can-do American way is still hard at work. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction about what the 1.5 degree limit in the Paris Agreement means for the power sector, the electricity sector. I'm going to be a bit techie about it initially I was asked to bring some science into it, so I'm going to show some basic issues from a science point of view. The Paris Agreement, of course, adopted the very ambitious 1.5 degree limit. Of course, the legal language is more complicated, well below 2 degrees, pursuing efforts to 1.5 degrees. But the bottom line is that it involves more and faster action than in the former 2 degree goal that the international community had adopted back in Cancun. Now, focusing a bit on the power sector, you see the green arrow pointing upwards there. That tells you that the carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel and industry under the Paris Agreement pathways globally need to be approaching or close to zero emissions by 2050. And that's got very important implications and faster and deeper implications than perhaps under the former 2 degree goal. Now, I'm just going to step through some of the recent science on this before going to some of the key conclusions, but there's been quite a lot published on what we need to do to get to 1.5 degrees, but one of the key messages from all of the modelling studies is that the decarbonisation of the energy sector needs to be the fastest and deepest of all the sectors, and that's partly why I'm focusing on it. What it means also is that the carbon composition of final energy, the carbon intensity of final energy needs to be very close to zero by the 2050s. And that implies a very fundamental transformation in the energy, electricity production system. Now, in 5 minutes, I can't go into the implications for heavy industry, energy-intensive industry, but at the end of the day, what drives that is the decarbonisation of the power sector. So I'm just going to step quickly through the Paris Agreement implications for the coal sector and the power industry to show you what that means. And I'm sure in question time, if there's time, we can deal with some of the energy-intensive industry sectors. Now, how important is coal? The answer is quite important. The energy sector is quite an important part of global emissions, around 70%. And coal is only 30% roughly of the world total primary energy supply at present, but a bit under half of the CO2 emissions. So it's a very significant area to actually have to deal with. Now, historically, of course, we've come to rely on coal in the power sector. So we've had a bit of a look at actually what this means. And here's the results of a study we did recently, which looked at the implications implied in the present power sector, in planned and forthcoming power plant globally. The black area here shows the likely emissions that would occur if the presently operating power fleet globally continued to the end of its economic life under current or foreseeable performance factors. And the bottom line of this figure is that you can see that the black area far exceeds the allowed carbon emissions for either the former 2-degree limit and especially for the Paris 1.5 degree limit. So already we have an issue with the existing coal-fired power plant fleet running to the end of its economic life. If you add on top of that planned and forthcoming power stations, the problem gets significantly worse. Now, what that means overall is that there needs to be a phase-out of coal globally. The studies that we're aware of and have done ourselves show phase-out to the 90–95% level in the OECD by 2030, by 2040s in China, and by 2050 for the rest of the world. What that also means that if you're investing in coal-fired power plant or planning to, then you run a very great risk of your asset being stranded and not being able to recover capital even from that. And it's also clear that the current plans in many regions far exceed those that are consistent with the Paris Agreement. So to summarise again, global phase-out by 2050, OECD, the European Union by 2030. Now, what's going on out there in the world? It's very interesting. We're seeing a peaking, what may well be a peaking of global coal production, down about 6% since the last year. I think that's already a positive sign that things are taking shape. In the power sector, that we're seeing very large amounts of coal capacity that was being used being retired. We've heard some examples already this morning, and that is a pattern that's beginning to grow around the world. We're seeing major changes in China and elsewhere. Now, what's driving this fundamentally is the question of renewable energy. Numerous scientific assessments done over the years have shown that there's very little in the way of technical obstacles to introducing renewable energy at scale. There's no fundamental technological limit ultimately into how much you can integrate into a system. Of course, there are transition issues, timing issues with technology and so on, but still the solutions are in sight. From the point of view of sustainable development, energy security, access to energy, and reduced air pollution, renewable energy is clearly the way to go. There are massive benefits there. Now, looking at the technology pricing issues, which are really fundamentally driving the transformation of energy markets globally, there's hardly a region in the world I know that's unaffected. What we're seeing here is a massive year-on-year drop in technology prices. This is a results from a recent International Renewable Energy Agency assessment showing how prices have dropped from 2010 to 2016. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but you can see across every different technology class, the deployed cost of technology has dropped really substantially. But in 2017, you'll see this has happened even faster. Hang on, I'll go back a bit. You see here there's really quite dramatic drops in some of the key technologies, utility scale photovoltaics with battery storage, concentrating solar power. South Australia is up on the panel. I want to refer to the concentrating solar power station in South Australia, replacing an old coal-fired power station. A really interesting example of how the technology costs at scale are dropping in a competitive market bidding situation. And also something else that's really important for this equation as well is just transition. One can give many examples of just transition issues, but just to allude to the South Australian context, that concentrating solar power station will come into a region that was recently into coal and use many of the engineering capabilities of the workforce in that region to drive it. And I'm mentioning just transition because it's a very important part of the primitive problem I showed you that many coal plants currently existing need to be closed down, and to do so will require just transition frameworks to facilitate the transformation of workforce and also to look at ensuring that you don't get too much resistance from the original owners of the plant as well economically. So I just wanted to leave that there. That's an overall snapshot picture of where the power sector needs to go, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was good start for this session. So we want to talk in this session about energy-intensive sectors, but let's start really with that coal question. And Preece, I'd like to start with you. Obviously, making this transition is vital. What does it mean for a region like Wales, which has historically been coal producers, been coal dependent? What can you share with us from Wales' experience?
Thank you very much. I'm here this morning on behalf of the Minister for Environment in Wales, who unfortunately has had a recent bereavement, so can't attend. But I think if she was here, I think what she'd kind of set out for everyone is the kind of the trajectory that Wales has been on, even over the last century. So looking back in time, in the 1920s, over a tenth of the population of Wales were engaged in the coal industry, working, not just the working population, the whole population. And even today, 25% of the population of Wales live in areas where there was coal extraction and coal industry. Now, that coal industry has virtually disappeared. And on a very positive note, in terms of today's context, we have one coal-fired power station left, and that will close by 2025 at the latest, and probably in the early 2020s. So we've seen a massive change in both the employment related to coal in Wales, as well as the energy generation, and over the last 20 years, a huge change over into renewables. So there are significant economic and social challenges for Wales as a result of this transition away from coal, leaving communities which were there purposefully designed and built around the coal industry, which no longer have that particular economic focus. So we have social building challenges around the type of quality of housing that we've got. How do we improve that? But positively, we're looking at ways of how we can derive a better future for those communities. So one interesting example, this year, we opened the largest onshore wind farm in England and Wales, right above a whole host of these old mining communities. It will generate not only local employment, but a significant community benefit pot for the next 30 years, and almost universal support locally for the development. So the local population are now looking forward. They were based, and their forefathers were working in an industry of a particular type. That served its purpose. We now know we need to be in a different place, and we are seeing the opportunities to transform that now. And in our particular instances, we're using government land, so this has been developed on forestry land, government land that we own, to derive that wider economic benefit for communities. So there's a lot of challenge to do around moving away from coal, but we are now up to about 40% renewables in Wales, and the Minister has recently set ambitious targets around getting to 70% by 2030. Within a no-subsidy context, that is a challenging and stretching target for us, but we are doing all we can to remove the barriers and to point developers in the right direction for development in that area.
Great, thank you. And South Australia as well, you've had great success in phasing coal out of your energy mix. What was similar there with Wales? What else can you tell us about that process?
Yes, so South Australia's last coal-fired power station closed down sort of early last year. So from 2016, we've been coal-free. And I think there's a few lessons in terms of renewables, in terms of the Australian context of what we've been able to achieve. So renewables, we went from almost 0% in 2002 to about 50% at the moment and growing quickly. And probably in contrast in part to Wales, the initial growth in those was very much industry and private sector led, but facilitated by government regulation getting out of the way. So we as a state government made really permissive planning regulations about being able to put wind farms on properties that really drove activity. And we were very active. We did a solar feed-in tariff in terms of households, so that was a government incentive obviously, but we've now got penetration of 1 in 3 households with solar. Now, I think 2 really important things happened about that, and that was that renewables became something that the community had a stake in and cared about. Those 1 in 3 households who have solar were not, as we initially thought, the wealthiest households who could afford it. Actually, people were doing the sums, and it was very much the low to middle income suburbs around our state who have actually made that decision, and did it a little bit on personal economic grounds as much as anything. So when the attack on renewables came, and it certainly has hit us with a vengeance, actually the misguided judgment of what the public would think about that was really interesting, because it felt like an attack on the good, hard-working families who'd put that investment on their rooftop. And that really changed the community feeling. Now that is important context, because actually that huge penetration of renewables in our state actually really sped up the removal of coal in South Australia, because the coal plants that have closed down did so on economic reasons too, because they were struggling to compete with renewables. And partially for South Australia, that's our very peaky load in summer, super hot summers in patches, 40 degrees for a week or 2 there, and then mild but still cool winters at times. And so the load that we need and what our power system has been egged up for was not really fitting the way that the coal was working, but was really suitable for renewables. So we do know that renewables probably pushed out coal on a quicker trajectory than otherwise would have happened. We are now as a government actively looking at how do we get more renewables in, and Bill talked about our solar thermal, which I'm really proud of as a government, because we did something important and clever, I think, in the dollars that we were already spending on electricity, where we said, as a state government, we have all of this power buy that we do, and we have just very boring standard contracts with retailers. What if we actually package that up, go to the market and say, we want new generation in our state and we'd like it to be renewable and dispatchable. What can you deliver, or low emission? And gas competed and solar thermal competed, and solar thermal was able to win that procurement. And that, I think, is a massive change, and really takes away that sense that base load is what coal gives us, and therefore, you know, having renewables is a problem. I think we've really changed that trajectory.
Great, thank you. And Chris, let's also talk about Ontario. So in 2003, you were 25% coal, 2014, gone. Tell us about that quite rapid decline there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're right. We were 25% reliant on coal to generate our electricity in 2003. 2014, Ontario closed its last coal-fired plant, and we have been we've had a green grid since that point. Not only that, we put into legislation as well that no future government could use coal to generate electricity, just to drive the point home that we are coal-free when it comes to that. But I will say it was there were significant challenges to the province, along with closing our coal-fired plants. And right now we stand at about 90% carbon-free energy. We had to build a few modern natural gas peaker plants just to help us meet the peak load during those times when electricity is at its most wanted. But we also had to embark on basically rebuilding the entire grid in Ontario and investing billions of dollars in transmission and distribution lines so that we could bring energy in where it was needed throughout the province and really rebuild the electrical system that had been ignored by countless governments for many, many years. So a multi-billion-dollar process, a lot of opposition from folks who didn't think we should be going green and saw it as a fad and didn't understand or didn't want to understand the importance of taking carbon out of our energy sector. So, but we stuck by it, and I will say that we're all exceptionally proud of the fact that you know, we're the first in North America to have done what we did. The you know, the upside is that you know, as I travel around Ontario, I seek out teachers and I do my research by walking around. This is by no means scientific, but I like to ask teachers of grade 5 elementary students, 10 years ago, how many children in your grade 5 class were using inhalers for a lung issue? And some of the teachers, especially in Southern Ontario, would tell me, well, about 50% of their kids were having to use those bronchial inhalers because of some type of lung issue. And then I asked them, today, how many children in your class are using inhalers? And oftentimes they'll sit and the penny will drop and they'll get a look in their eye and they'll say, you know, I think I only have 1 or 2 kids, if that. So for me, that's been the biggest change. We have not had a smog alert in Southern Ontario since 2015. I grew up in an era north of Toronto where the air was orange with smog and pollution. That's gone. It's gone because of closing the coal plants. It's also gone because we have another significant program in Ontario called Drive Clean, where all cars are inspected on a regular basis to make sure that they're not polluting the air. So those two things combined have really changed things for us. But I'll say, as Governor Brown was saying, this is still an ongoing fight for Ontario as we continue to green our economy. It's an ongoing struggle. Closing the coal plants wasn't an easy thing. Industry was not happy. The consumers were riled because they saw additional costs or what they perceived were additional costs on their electricity bills because of the province going green. But I think as time goes on and we see savings in our healthcare system and industry through efficiencies is beginning to drive its costs downward, things are changing.
Great, thank you. So the Climate Group, we run something called the Energy Transition Platform with some of the state and regional governments. Priest, can you tell us a bit about how that platform has worked for Wales? The ambition is to help governments learn from one another, see if we can accelerate the uptake of energy transition policies. So tell us a bit about your experience.
Yeah, great. We've been involved with the Energy Transition Platform on 3 different elements. The first is around energy-intensive industries, again, working with a number of subnational governments. Then on energy efficiency and buildings. And the third element is around community and renewable energy. And I think it's been hugely instructive for us, particularly at a point in time when we are now moving from a non-legislative climate change framework to a legislative framework. So we are in the process currently of setting our pathway to 2050 in legislation, of putting in detailed plans and getting the numbers, as various people have referred to them earlier, and really identifying what are the detailed actions we need to undertake across different sectors. So the timing of the platform has been particularly good in terms of testing our thinking across different areas. We know that heat, in particular in buildings, is a real challenge, particularly poor housing stock in Wales. We need to think about how we can decarbonise that and financial, well, there are limits to how much money we as a government can put in. So it's really interesting to learn about the other ways that different administrations, particularly subnational level, because they have often a lot of the levers at their disposal when they come to this, address this particular issue. So we've been talking to various governments, including areas of Austria, and particularly where we're quite interested around the approaches that they've taken. Ditto when we talk about the industrial sector. This is still a very important issue. So we don't have the coal now, but we still have the manufacturing industry. So we produce 50% of the steel in the UK, in Wales. We have large oil refineries and what have you. So we need to find a way of working with these sectors. And we have quite a close bilateral relationship with them, but it has been quite interesting to see how other areas, such as North Rhine-Westphalia, they've had more of a structured approach rather than a reactive one-to-one approach. And again, it's interesting to test our approaches going forward, because we can't rely on a reactive approach now when it comes to industrial energy efficiency. We have to be a bit more structured around the targets that we want to achieve. I think it's also been good to us as well to test our thinking around community energy. We've done a lot of work around community energy, ensuring that that there is local ownership where possible and local input into new renewable energy developments. So it's been interesting again to compare the approach that we've been taking, and hopefully I think people have been seeing the approaches and benefiting from our learning in that particular area. So collaboration is critical, and I think it's critical going forward because none of us are standing still. We're continually learning from each other as the targets ratchet up.
Great, thank you. And it was great within the platform to see people find their opposite number in a similar government and realise that their pain is not theirs alone and really learn from each other. Sandy, can you tell us about collaboration between different levels of government? That's very much the same level. How does it work with different levels of government?
Yeah, well, I certainly can reflect that in South Australia we have a particular partnership that should be, I think, replicated all over the place. But what we've discovered about it is that it's more rare than we would expect it to be. And that is that our state government is partnering with our City of Adelaide Council, and the Lord Mayor and our Premier are incredibly united on focusing on climate change. And together we've made a pact and a public commitment to strive for Adelaide to be the world's first carbon neutral city. And so we have our state government and our local government completely focused on this joint goal, and we have joint programs, we have work that we both do that is very focused on that goal, and we're just so clear on what we're trying to achieve together with that goal that the partnership is one that just is becoming very second nature. And that, to me, is really just as simple as having a clear and shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and then looking at the levers that local government has and the levers that state government has. And for us, we hope at some point that there will be a federal government participation in that as well, because there are 3 tiers of government in Australia that can really help us transform to have a low carbon city, and we do need much more involvement from our national government. That said, and it's been my learning from Paris and beyond, is that the activities that are happening at the supranationals, as the governor's talked about, is really where most of the levers are. And so it is incumbent on us at the places where we are driving building regulation, transport and energy policies, that we actually do take on that mantle and really push. And certainly Christiana Figueres has urged all of us, but whether we be local government, state or beyond, to work together to ensure that our national governments will ratchet up when the obligation comes to them.
Thank you. And then Chris, talking about collaboration here, we've talked about other levels of government. Tell us about different parts of the economy. So how have you worked with different sectors within the economy on the clean energy transition?
Well, it's becoming, I think, increasingly easy. It's an interesting position to be in, because normally what I have found with other issues is the public leads government, the public leads business. In Ontario, perhaps across Canada, what I'm finding is that business very much gets it, especially big business gets that they have to move to a carbon-free existence if they are to compete in a global market. So, we're faced with this challenge now of continuing to bring the public on board. One of the things we've done, and I've heard Sandy talk about the relationship with municipalities, we have launched back in August our version of a green bank, Green Ontario. We've put about 377 million Canadian into it in its first year to do a number of things, to work with homeowners, to work with industry, to look at innovative ways of and to help them bridge to low carbon economy, to help them become more efficient and save energy. So, for example, with municipalities, we have the Ontario Municipal Greenhouse Gas Challenge. It's a $100 million fund that municipalities across Ontario can apply to with innovative outside-the-box sorts of projects to help them decarbonize, to help them become energy efficient. We're oversubscribed to that, actually, which didn't surprise me, because there's a lot of interest at the municipal level. So we're working with our municipal partners, and they in turn are working with their residents to really drive the message home. For example, just as we launched the Green On, we had an initiative to give away 100,000 smart thermostats for your home that included free installation, and with that came an analysis, a quick analysis of your home. So when the installer came to put the thermostat in, they would also look at your house and talk to you about windows and insulation and doors and those sorts of things. Within about 22 hours of launching that initiative, which we knew was really about getting publicity, within about 22 hours, those 100,000 thermostats were gone, and people continued to apply at the rate of about 2,500 a day. So I think we've committed now to install 150,000 thermostats by March. But what it really tells me, and this is what I hear on the street from my neighbors when I'm walking about, is people know this is a problem and they want to know what they can do. Right? I think what I have feared is that we have been so doom and gloom with climate change, as we should. We can't downplay the risk to our existence. But the public, I think, have become so scared that they've been scared into inaction. We're working on things to get them back into the equation. We're starting with smart thermostats as a way of beginning the discussion, and we'll roll out other programs for the public, for homeowners, because buildings are a big part of our carbon issue in Ontario. Around insulation, doors and windows, we're working with businesses to help them better retrofit their buildings, apartments, social housing, all sorts of things we're able to do. And we're able to fund it because we have, through our cap and trade system and the partnership we have with Quebec and California, we're able to we have a price on carbon. We're able to, through our auctions, to create some proceeds from that. I think we're up to about $1.5 billion in proceeds this year. Every dollar of that goes back into these greenhouse gas reduction initiatives. So there's a whole host of things we're doing, working very closely with industry, working very closely with our energy industry, and really trying to work closely with the public.
Great, thank you. And that's interesting to hear that. We've launched a campaign recently around optimism based on some research that says it's very hard to create change from a place of fear. And that's what social studies tell us, but yet we really go after it in this doom and gloom way. So we're trying to look at how do you shift that narrative, because we've done a great job of persuading the public that climate change is happening, but we haven't really followed that up by telling them, and there are things that you can do about it.
Yeah, there are simple things you can do, and that's the message I think we need to drive home with the public. And I was delighted at Climate Week in New York to see the campaign, I'm a climate change optimist.
Great, we'll sell you a t-shirt. Do we have anyone in the audience who has questions? We've got a few minutes, and I'm sure you're all burning. So yeah, we've got some microphones. Let's take a couple of questions, and then the panel can pick and choose. And don't forget to include Bill in your questions, because he needs more probing.
Hello. Yeah, I'm from India, a state in the southern province called Telangana. I would like to ask a question to the person, to Chris Ballard of Ontario Minister regarding your phase out of coal. Two issues in the sense we have huge coal fields. One, and two, we also have the distribution companies. The path to take a solar or a renewable path is, I think, is not disputed. But the issue is mostly with the unions, and it's the issue with human families who are involved in the extraction of coal. The human families who are working in companies, distribution companies. That is the bigger challenge. So as an official, as a bureaucrat, we can always tell the policymakers, but the policymakers look at us like aliens. You know, where have you come from? Don't you know that there are families who are involved in actually trying to phase out coal? So I think the issue is not really with regard to the path; it's the issue with regard to the human issues. When you really, take and how did you really overcome such problems? I mean, what were the obstacles, and how did you convince people that they can have a different job? I think we would like to hear on that.
Hello, I'm Lars Nilsson from Lund University in Sweden. I'd just like to share some very encouraging news, and that's the Swedish steel industry has embarked on a project to do fossil-free steel based on renewable electricity and hydrogen reduction. It's not an R&D project, it's a process development project, and they're really going for it. Thank you.
Good work. Not a question, but great to hear. Let's take a question there.
Hi, I'm Michael Small. I'm from Canada, but I've also recently lived in Australia. I'd be interested to know from the panel how the actions that your governments have taken at a state provincial level have inspired or in some way motivated other provinces or states in your respective federations. Let's leave it like that.
Thank you. Do you want to take the question specifically to Ontario and then the panel?
Well, and the gentleman from India, I think the bigger question is the transformation from an economy from economies that were based on wealth creation based on utilization of carbon, burning of coal or fossil fuels, and it's something that Ontario has struggled with, and by no means I think are any of us free and clear of continuing to educate, continuing to fight the rearguard actions against the fossil fuel interests, quite frankly, who would rather have us doing things the old way than moving into renewables. So a lot of the question, and I've been having this discussion with folks I've been meeting here and elsewhere, a lot of the discussion is about how do we as government, how do we as policymakers move our society into a low-carbon economy with as few bumps along the way as possible. Now, in Ontario, moving away from coal perhaps is certainly easier than in India, because we don't have major coal pits in Ontario that employ tens of thousands of people. So it's not a matter of throwing people out of work as we move away from coal. It was for us, the struggle was a perceived increase in electricity as we move away from coal, which we know is virtually free in terms of creating energy, to a more expensive system, and we also had to do it at a time where we were putting billions into rebuilding the grid. Whether we moved off coal or not, we would have had to rebuild that grid. We had to do things at the same time. So I think for us as politicians, the challenge is moving into a new world, a new economy, and minimizing the impact to our residents to the greatest extent as possible.
Thank you. And the other question about inspiration, and with the clock we can all see ticking down, we'll have this as our kind of closing words of inspiration to everyone.
Oh, well, I wanted to comment on the inspiration point and join the two questions together, because one of the things we were able to do in South Australia recently was put out a tender to have the world's biggest lithium-ion battery, and Tesla and Neoen won that contract. So on the 1st of December, we will be turning on our battery. It's attached to a wind farm, and hopefully that will make big world news. But what's so great is that 90-something companies bid in for that battery tender. And one of the companies who didn't win that tender, a local South Australian company, is now partnered with Arium, our steelworks, to actually do that very same thing of making our steelworks run on renewable energy and use battery as part of that process. So that, in answer to Michael's question of what flow-on and things can happen, I think industry is seeing the flow-on as well as governments. The other part I would say is that in Australia, there are a lot of local and state governments doing really innovative things, and we are really, I suppose, spurring each other to action at that regional level. We have Victoria looking at VRET and having renewable energy targets in their space. We have the ACT has done a reverse auction, and the whole of the ACT has renewable power through that mechanism. So there's a lot of activity happening, but probably the most important one is learning the lesson of huge renewable penetration into a grid that wasn't built for it, and actually starting to pay proper attention to the mechanics of that, and both on the just transition side of what does that look like in a planning sense, but also what do we need to do in terms of peak load and reliability. And they're technical challenges, not ideological challenges.
Thank you. I think we will. Have you got 1 minute of inspiration for us, please?
Okay, very briefly, the point about steel was very interesting. As I mentioned, Wales has a significant steel industry, and quite often we see these as problems. But as you say, there are solutions coming along. In Wales, we already have an electric arc furnace. We are in discussion with other companies about the development of hydrogen, and I think we need to think about this because we will continue to need steel and other such products, so we need to think creatively. And in particular in Wales, because of the importance of that industry, we're working quite closely with academia and others around the uses of steel, particularly around the use of steel in the buildings industry, using steel paneling as a way of capturing solar gain and turning buildings into means of generating power, actually. So there's quite a lot of technological innovation work that we're undertaking with business, Tata, BASF, Chemical Company, and so forth, to look at that opportunity. Other areas we're looking at inspirational as well. We're passing examples between ourselves, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the UK government. So we are developing, in particular, expertise around the public sector and community renewables side, I think, which we can then share with other administrations, and we in turn learn from what they are doing.
Thank you so much. And please, will you all join me in thanking this great panel for all their inspiration and thoughts.
So thank you, Helen. Thank you, everybody. We have had a really, I think, fruitful morning of discussion. I'd just like to say a final thank you to our partner, Climate Analytics, who have provided the really solid background analysis and are keeping us all to account, I think, with your information and analysis. Thank you to all our speakers in both sessions for showing us how you're putting it into practice. And please, if you do not know about the Under 2 Coalition, we are now nearly 200 jurisdictions at the subnational level committed to an under 2 degree future. And as you can see from the discussions today, we are serious about that. So thank you to all who have signed the Under 2 MOU so far.